and welcome. We are here at the Wellington Congress in the beautiful University of Southampton.
Is it beautiful?
It is partially beautiful. This particular corner is rather lovely. We've got the trees and the sunlight and everything like that.
Almost like we set it up for the blossom just for you.
Oh, well, I am the blossom. And we are here, because I have a Zack White with me.
You do. Thank you for
You're
including
very
me
welcome.
in this conversation.
And we are here with Rory Butcher.
Hello, yes.
And Rory, we have one very important question for you.
I can't wait.
Why haven't you finished your PhD yet?
Unfortunately, I've done the ever...
That's meant to be my line.
I've done the ever constant thing of saying yes to things. And those unfortunately build up and eventually you have to do those things that you've said yes to. And so where otherwise I would love to have been writing for the last few months, I was busy organising a conference of my own, which went, I think, quite well.
Good.
And then since then I've also had teaching commitments that I have to go and do. And then apparently having a life is something you have to do during a PhD.
Not necessarily have to, but it's recommended.
I try to.
Yeah, that's fair.
Is the key.
Recommended?
Recommended.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
look, so his advisor recommends against it. His fiancée recommends for it.
Okay.
I get caught in the middle.
But if I may, having a life? What's one of those?
Particularly the last few years I've been battling that much more.
So you know how I write about cultural history?
Uh-huh.
That's what people consume during lives.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just carry on with my crime and punishment
fair.
stuff. That's
That's very
much better. We are meant to be here to actually talk to you about what you're doing and what you're
Yes.
researching. Last time we had you on talking about fencibles.
Yes.
We just called the episode Fencibles!
Yes.
Are we still? Is this like Fencibles! Part 2? What are you talking
I
about
think
this
so.
time around?
What about a horrible histories one? What about offensive fencibles?
Yeah, that's quite good actually. I like that. That's
Yeah.
Although defensive fencibles,
Defensive
fencibles, yeah,
fencibles?
there's something in there. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm still doing the fencibles. They are, after all, my thesis. Today, I'm talking much more about inter-branch relations, so how the army and the militia interacted with these different cousins. I call them cousins, colleagues, equivalents.
There must be a hierarchy there, though, in terms of popular perception at the time, right? So talk me through what people think the differences are in terms of quality.
Well, in the army, there's a legal sense of them not being the same. That they are men who've enlisted for limited service, as opposed to the army, which is general service, and they have a bounty difference. They get 5 guineas less as a reward because they're not doing the same job, which I think that makes sense. They're being paid the same, but they don't get that same initial outlay. Throughout their careers, particularly officers, tend to find much more of a distinction, and it's not necessarily in always explicit sense. Sometimes it's more implicit. So when regiments are sent to the Irish establishment, they get less allowance. Now, if you're raising a regiment specifically to go to Ireland, you're going to get less allowance, which is fine. But if you're raising a regiment to go wherever, you're going to get more. So there's a lot of the time officers, and particularly officers going to Ireland, complain about being poor and being broke, trying to raise regiments. Really, though, personally, in Britain, mainland Britain, people seem to sort of not really care too much. There's that well-spoken scarlet fever that we hear a lot about in a lot of writings. That absolutely is present no matter really what branch you're in. There's sort of not really a distinction in the public eye. People saying, oh, well, you're only a militiaman, so you're not attractive, whereas that man who's a regular, they're sort of seen the same. And we see in Jane Austen's work.
Yeah, I was going to say.
There's not really a massive distinction. The John Harley, whose memoirs Gareth Glover's published for Hellion, I think, he talks about being invited by a local volunteer officer to come and inspect the men because he presumed he looked professional. So clearly there is a hierarchy in the legal sense, and particularly with the rank and file, they are often asked to draft into the regulars.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right, there's that pull through.
Exactly, but actually in the field, when they are involved in combat, they're not talked about any differently. In fact, they're often more commonly referred to as soldiers as opposed to militiamen, because they're not militiamen, particularly in Ireland, where the Irish militia is such a distinct concept of what a soldier is.
So this is one of these areas, much like you get today in the division of the forces, right? Royal Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, where to the average person on the street, it's all servicemen. You're all soldiers, but try telling our co-host Liam Telfer that he's a Marine and see what happens.
Exactly, it's a really important, and particularly with the way that regular officers then later talk about their careers, because some of them do serve in the Fencibles and then later transfer. For example, William Ponsonby, of dying at Waterloo fame, serves in a fencible cavalry regiment. That's how he gets his start as an ensign, as a cornet. Sorry, I should say. Cavalry've got their own little weird.
They do. They absolutely do.
But he starts out there, and when he talks about in 1809, there's an exercise where they ask every officer to provide a CV, basically, and it is. Some of it's quite basic, some of it's not. Ponsonby effectively acknowledges that he served and then moves on. And that's quite common, where regulars will say, oh yeah, I did start in a fencible regiment, and then I started doing proper stuff.
Is that how you're going to describe your dissertation?
Proper stuff, yeah, or not proper stuff, yes.
I love the way how you come up with the slightly catty and inane comment and then hand the microphone over to me for a proper question.
Well, no, I felt you reaching for it.
But you had to get the catty comment in first,
We've
right?
got to.
What do you pay me for?
I do wonder sometimes, if I'm being entirely honest. In terms of learning, to bring it actually back to... Look, could you just shut up a minute, honestly? In terms of the learning between the different sort of... They're not different services, but the different sort of elements of these forces. Is there any kind of looking around and saying, oh, actually, the Fencibles are doing this, that's really interesting, can we learn something from that? Or is it all very sort of the army is the mothership, and then sort of we all take our guidance from people like Dundas?
I think there's more a general shift in the idea of that gentlemanly amateur towards the professional, and that's more going on throughout all the different services at the same time. I mean, I've got myself Officer's Guide to Soldiering, written by Captain Reed from the Essex Fencible Infantry, and it's been produced, this particular copy has been produced for the Oxford Militia.
Okay.
So he's published this guide, and that's cleared and published and done fine. The specific printing has been done by commission for a militia regiment. And a lot of what he's talking about isn't unique to the Fencibles, it's just general soldiering stuff, much as you see in regular regimental orders, as they exist as well. And again, they're all adhering to this idea of what a soldier should be. A professional soldier, someone who knows his duty, who knows his responsibilities, and particularly above that subaltern grade going into captaincy and field officers. There's so much a sense of you need to do this, because if not, your men are going to suffer.
Yeah. So, I mean, the instinct, and I think this may also be functionally a late Napoleonic War viewpoint, which I know you despise. But there is that feeling, especially among the regulars, once they hit Spain, of we know what we're doing. They're toy soldiers. They're chocolate soldiers. But at the same time, for certain things like occupation and policing, it's going to be the militia and the Fencibles that have the teachable experience.
Sort of, and this is where it really comes down to what the army does in society, and this is where I very much ground myself in the 18th century as opposed to this later Napoleonic nonsense.
That wrong century, like the sort of dark and murky world.
The fascinating and insightful and varied and nuanced world of the 18th century.
I think we might have to end this interview here, partly because we might end up just coming to blows over this, but also more crucially because everybody is disappearing to the next session. So this is very much TBC. Rory, lovely to see you. Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for being on.
Thank you very much. Good to see you. Lovely.
Tits up.
Tits up. Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars podcast here at the Wellington Congress. Take two of this interview. Yes, thank you, Zach. Zach is off camera.
Because somebody's an absolute moron on this show and forgot to turn on all of the wireless microphones that we paid so much money for. So, yeah, enjoy. Sorry, as you were.
There's breaking news coming out of the Napoleonic Wars podcast. Of the three of us, Zach's the one who doesn't know how to turn things on.
I'll just add value when things are rolling, yeah? Do you want me to just go and wait in the trailer and I'll come back?
Oh, God. Yeah, no, that's fair. Honestly, Zach, I don't think you're good at dating because everyone thinks you're taken by the two of us. Like, this is just some weird-ass polyamorous triad.
I mean, I would say your reputation precedes you in that regard. That's the problem there.
Yeah, it is. Should we try an actual take?
You could try if you want. I'm not going to stop.
All right.
Thing rolling. You can carry on.
Hello and welcome to take 3 of this Napoleonic... Jesus Christ. All right. Hello and welcome to take 4 of this Napoleonic Wars podcast, Vox Pop, here at the Wellington Congress. We are once again in Southampton University, and I'm here with a very familiar face, the poster boy, calendar boy of the podcast, Mr. Liam Telfer. And how are you having? You're not speaking. You're just here. You're just here for the fun.
That's right. Yeah, I'm not speaking today. Probably for the best because I don't have much of a voice.
You don't. Too much shouting.
I wish,
forward. Tally ho.
I wish it was overindulgence, but it's just a cold.
Oh dear.
So yeah, not speaking today, but just enjoying some of the talks that we've been treated to.
I can imagine. What's been your highlight so far?
Two. I've got to go for two.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So right off the bat this morning, I thought Beatrice was
Oh yeah.
a different gravy, right? Like she is outstanding, and bringing that kind of it's not just looking at the modern things with the impact that history's had on it, but then weaving it all together.
Yeah.
It's like time doesn't exist
Exactly.
when Beatrice is around. It's just insane, and just thinking to some of the implications of what she's talking about is I mean, that was brilliant. And then the second highlight for me so far has been Kevin Lynch. Sort of, I like to call him friend of the show. I'm not sure if he would consider so after the amount of episodes we're making him do.
Prisoner of the show.
Yeah, prisoner of the show. Yeah, British Army prisoner of the show. But there's some great content coming up with Kevin, and he's been talking about the Georgian Army Officers Database.
Oh yeah.
And he's lit a fire in me, I think, because there's the possibilities of that data of expansion within that database and using that model to explore battalion histories, logistical stories, animal movements, and it's just we can use that model for so many different things. And I'm going to be pushing him a little bit, and I think he's probably more scared than he was before.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
So is there a future in which suddenly you're in a PhD program under Kevin, like doing second publications on this?
I mean, you know what? I'd be honoured, but I don't think that's going to happen. Anytime soon. I think the lack of undergrad would probably, unfortunately, be barring me from that. Unless we can print one off, then we're at university, so that counts, right?
Right. No, it absolutely does. Zach, you graduated from here.
I did. It's not so much the location that's the problem, so much as what your wife would say if you just told her that on top of everything else that you're doing, you're now going to do a doctorate. Because like a doctorate isn't a thing that you do in your spare time. It's the thing that just annihilates your spare time, right?
That's true. No, that is very, very true. And Harriet is, Zach and I already, our entire lives exist on Harriet's nod. Like she decides otherwise, we're gone. So you going over and saying, honey, I'm going to do a doctorate, might go down about as well as, honey, let's have a third kid.
Yeah, no thanks. No thanks. We're done. But you know what? I'd love to do something. I'd love to do something official. It's so difficult though, isn't it? Between the cost of these things, the just getting your foot in the door for someone who's got, to all intents and purposes, no qualifications. It's very difficult to enter academia, but yeah, if Kevin was looking for someone to make the team sweep the floor and come up for ideas to put it into a database, I'm his man.
You can run bodyguard protection for him, right?
That's it.
I mean, we joke around, but actually you are on the cusp of getting published in the not too distant future. So you've kind of got to that point where you don't need the qualifications. Like if you're young, you need the qualifications to establish credibility. You don't need that anymore. You can kind of come in as an enthusiast, and then you've got a couple of Muppets here who are going to kind of help guide you in terms of the research and where it needs to go, but that research is in the pipeline. You're going to be talking about Hougoumont and fires and Bernie stuff.
Well, let's hope so. I hope it goes down well. It was a real labour of love. And it's tricky with anything Waterloo or Hougoumont because it's such a told story. But I think my work stands up for itself. I think it's something that's not really been done before by anyone else, and hopefully we can get that out there and turn a few heads.
Yeah.
Once again, we are being cut short, but Bo, I'll let you have the final word.
Yeah, I was just going to say, having read this piece of Liam's, everyone who thinks they've read everything on Waterloo is in for a treat, because it is a brand new take in a way that we as historians, classically trained historians, are not capable of giving. This is the experience of a man who has fought, but it's also the experience of a man who runs into burning buildings. And that is a crucial level of this. So I think it's something to look out for. I'm particularly proud that we're getting it in front of more eyes. Not just because you're a friend, but because this is damn good scholarship.
I appreciate it, and like I say, it's with anything, I suppose it's for the glory and it's for making people think, and
Absolutely.
yeah, like hopefully we can tell some more stories that are important and get some good relationships going with it.
Exactly, and may God protect the right.
Indeed, indeed.
We'll be back soon.
Hello and welcome to the Wellington Congress. We are doing Vox Pops. It's a sunny day near the Solent, and I'm joined by Dr. William Fletcher of King's College London. William, welcome. Tell me about your paper.
Thanks very much. I'm going to be talking about the impact of the Scottish Enlightenment on the British Army's staff system. So essentially, how a network of Scottish officers from a very small part of Scotland thought about war and decided to impose some reforms, especially to the staff system, and the effect that had, especially on Wellington's army in the Peninsular War.
So, simple question to start off with, what was the Scottish Enlightenment?
Yeah, well, you say simple question,
Okay.
but difficult one in terms of this idea around, especially the word science, coming into all aspects of society, really, moving sort of through the Age of Reason into the Enlightenment, and looking at applying science to various things. And what I'm trying to do is look at how a scientific approach was brought into the military world, and so that really meant an importance in mapping and understanding the terrain, and then having a process by which a staff system could work rather than a more ad hoc system that they'd used beforehand. So a sort of standardisation of a process, essentially.
Okay, and what are the organisations that we're talking about in terms of the British Army command system that you're talking about?
Yeah, so my research is very focused on the Quartermaster General's Department, and a common misconception, which is understandable in the sense of how the staff system has developed more recently, is that they were doing a logistical role, whereas their real focus was on operations, as we'd sort of now know it, and so it was all about how do you move armies around on campaign in a coordinated manner, and equally on the battlefield, how do you coordinate and move them around on the battlefield. So they're getting into things like tactics and how you move troops around, and that's something they practice in England, and then they take that into effect in the Peninsula later on.
So interesting. So we have this kind of very abstract philosophical movement, and then couldn't get less abstract really in terms of logistics and moving soldiers around on the ground. So you've given a few examples there, but can you give us a better idea of how this actually translated these ideas into kind of army management in the Napoleonic period, perhaps?
Yeah. So essentially the key link between, as you say, a sort of abstract idea of the Scottish Enlightenment, or the Enlightenment more generally, and what they're practically doing was the foundation of the Royal Military College at High Wycombe in 1799. And the idea behind this originally was to sort of educate commanders and staff officers, but it soon became specifically for educating officers in the Quartermaster General's Department. And so exactly what you're saying kind of happened, of taking these abstract ideas and having lectures about how do you apply scientific principles to war, and then they'd take that out onto the ground around High Wycombe, and actually go out on horseback and practice without any troops, but as a collective of staff officers, how you'd move these soldiers around. So yeah, exactly as you're kind of alluding to, that they were taking these abstract ideas, practicing them at High Wycombe, and then they're actually coming into effect in the field in the Peninsula, and other campaigns as well.
And what were the names of the people who were kind of behind this movement? I imagine some Scottish people perhaps were involved.
Yeah. There's various networks which I'm still looking into, but essentially Henry Dundas, and right. David Dundas, that whole family, and the Cathcart family are the two big ones that I'm looking at, and then sort of down a layer, you're really looking at Robert Anstruther and George Murray, who are both from the 3rd Foot Guards, and they are the head of the Quartermaster General's Department in Egypt. Anstruther is the head of that, with Abercrombie, another Scottish officer, and then Murray takes over with Sir John Moore, again another Scottish officer. He's working for the retreat to Corunna, and then he's the long-term Quartermaster General with Wellington in the Peninsula. So yeah, these Scottish officers are all popping up all over the place, but those are a few of the key networks.
And what are the concrete differences that we might think of in terms of the way war was being fought? I imagine in kind of, the 19th century as opposed to the early 18th century, like kind of examples that you could point to in the Napoleonic period and say this is an example of kind of new rational warfare.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing is the scale at which war's being fought at now. Obviously, kind of a total war taking place, but the huge mobilisation of troops. So Napoleon obviously is trying to deal with that and his staff in terms of how do you coordinate such large armies. But then Wellington's facing a very similar problem, especially by 1813 and 14, with a huge army under his command. So that scale, and then how do you coordinate it, and also how do you do that at speed compared to the enemy, is really important. So I think that rather than sort of any technological changes that we might see in other periods of warfare that are causing major changes in thinking, the big change here is the scale and the speed at which you can manoeuvre, which I think is an important departure from previous times, such as the 7 Years' War.
Well, William hasn't actually delivered his paper yet, so this is the most authentic Vox Pop you can possibly get. Thank you, William, for joining us. We'll put his details in the description.
Great, thanks, Josh.
Hello and welcome back to the Waterloo Congress and the Napoleonic Wars pod, and we are doing some live Vox Pops, and we have a treat for you because we have the Stadtholder herself, the legend, friend of the pod, and how many distinguished professorships do you now hold? Is it 6?
Stop it.
Beatrice de Graaf, who was our first, she opened the conference. You opened the conference with our first keynote.
Yes, it gave me opportunity to relax afterwards.
I understand that. So why don't you, can you give us a little bit of a summary of what you spoke about?
Well, the thing is, I wanted to do something about my new research project, which is on 1830, the revolutions in international perspective. But then I thought, with everything going on in the world outside, geopolitical turmoil, etc., and I discussed this with Karen, and I said, how about I bring in some of that current crisis feeling into the past, or otherwise bring the past into the present? And she said, let's do that. So what I try to do with this talk is connect the past with the present in, first of all, showing how the leaders of today abuse our history. So they take our precious 19th century history, they take the balance of power, they take the concept of Europe, they take what happened after 1815 and they abuse it, they weaponize it. Vladimir Putin does that. Donald Trump does that in alluding to the Monroe Doctrine. Medvedev does that in bringing in the Cossacks again. Even Macron does that in glorifying Napoleon, mythifying Napoleon. So I thought, what does that all mean? Is it just anecdotal, or is there a more darker explanation behind it? And unfortunately, I think there is. What they're trying to do is find a kind of justification, those leaders, legitimation for going at it alone, discarding the rule-based international order, undermining long-existing norms and institutions, and thinking again in zero-sum games and spheres of influence. Greenland and Canada for Trump, Ukraine and perhaps even the Baltic for Putin. So that's why they're doing that. And then my question was, can we sort of identify that exactly, map it, and then try to compare and confront it with the actual history? And if you then bring in the Duke of Wellington, he's very good in slaying those zombie myths.
He absolutely is. One of the things I found particularly fascinating about your talk was the bit where you talked about when Putin first came to power, how he was weaponizing a different portion. He was trying to play the great power game in a much more 19th century traditional way.
Yes. Now that's interesting. So if you look at Putin, who came to power in 2000, he also already from the onset used the 19th century. I'm saying not abusing, but using, because he tried to hark back. I mean, you have to imagine the Soviet Union came tumbling down, dissolution, communism, end of ideology. So Putin had to hark back to something that gave the Russians, that gave himself spine again. And he said, well, what about the time we, with the Cossacks, marched into France and liberated Europe and laid the foundations for a collective security framework? And he explicitly made references to that while inaugurating a number of statues. But he also spoke to the German Bundestag, the parliament, and also tried to sort of connect back to, we were good friends. We run Europe. We, the 4 or 5 big powers. And he hoped that they would see him in that fashion. But, I mean, the other powers in Europe didn't really, because Russia, military speaking, it still was a great power, but economically speaking, not so much. And it had just dissolved.
That makes a lot of sense. So now we're standing here in the beautiful sunshine under this gorgeous tree, but part of your talk was about the Duke of Wellington's winter trip to St. Petersburg.
Yeah, well, it was also March, but it was still winter.
Yeah,
It's still not
that's winter
nice
in-
weather
in
like
Russia.
Yeah, exactly. No, this is a very interesting episode. I have to say, Josh Proven wrote a beautiful blog about this. Let's pay homage to him.
We'll link the blog in the description.
Yes, please do. But he also helped me with finding some new documents in highlighting how the Duke of Wellington thought about Russia. And the three frames that I just mentioned that are being raised from the dead in a zombie way by the leaders, the unilateral power play, the balance of power as a zero-sum game, and also the almost eschatological way of promoting themselves as messianic leaders.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
those three frames, the Duke of Wellington encountered them as well.
Yeah.
And counter them. And that teaches us something how we could counter them today. So he went to Russia in order to explain and convince the successor to Alexander I, Nicholas I, convinced him that going at it alone was not nice, was not wise, and would not pass, because then Britain, France and the others would have come to help Russia against the Ottoman Sultan. That was it. It's about Greek crisis and the Eastern crisis. Second thing is that balance of power, zero-sum game. You have to be very careful in doing it.
do.
I mean, the Duke of Wellington also accepted a kind idea of a sphere of influence. I mean, Portugal and the Netherlands were considered within a
British
special
sphere,
relation. Well, perhaps not so much the sphere. They didn't really use it, but a special relation.
Yeah.
So they would have looked very strangely had the Russians tried to meddle with
No,
those.
of course. No,
so-
that makes a great deal of sense.
but then he tried to argue with Nicholas to convince him and say, yeah, well, you can take care of your sphere of influence in the Crimea, Serbia, perhaps even a little bit of Greece, but be aware you will touch upon the spheres of influence of others. The Spanish, the Austrian, the French, and you also have to leave the Ottomans intact. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, this political eschatology. That's also a very interesting aspect. The Duke of Wellington let himself be coached before going to Russia in all those traditions and rituals, and he paid respect to them. He didn't go there and say you need to be more liberal, or have you. He respected that. He even went along with it to a certain extent. But then he said, well, other powers have their ideology and religions as well. So again, be nice to each other.
Yeah, no, of course. We're just about out of time, but I did want to ask you one rather cheeky question, which is you in your talk you mentioned that he was tutored by an absolutely beautiful Russian princess,
Prince Dorothea von Lieven.
Prince Dorothea von Lieven. What are the odds they had an affair?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think he was a bit afraid of her.
Ooh. Oh, I want to know more
In
about
the
any
sense
woman that terrified him.
that she was a bit of an harpy sometimes and
Okay.
could spill the beans. So I think he
Okay.
was a bit afraid for his reputation.
Fair enough. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. He was discretion is the better part of valor for once.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Beatrice, thank you so much for talking to us, and we look forward to having you on the podcast very soon.
Thank you, Luke, especially for that last question.
Always. Hello and welcome back. This is the Napoleonic Wars podcast, and we are here right at the end of the Wellington Congress, and I am here with the woman without whom it would not exist. Karen, thank you so much for a superb conference.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure, and I've very much enjoyed it all. Hopefully, everybody else who's attended has done so.
I have not heard a bad word. It's been, the only complaint is that it's over. That truly,
Well-
I mean, for you, that's probably not a complaint.
No, it's been really lovely to organise these things. It's very important to us that we continue the work on the Wellington Archives. Obviously, we are the home of the Wellington Archives. It's a very important research resource, and we just want to sort of really create all these networks, the links, and just bring together, showcase all the sort of really exciting research that's been conducted relating to Wellington.
Yeah, it was really lovely seeing multiple times in papers, sort of, I found this in the Wellington Archive, just right there. And then for our listeners and our viewers, can you give us a breakdown of some of what you have?
Indeed. Well, we have about 100,000 papers within the archives of the First Duke of Wellington. So it really covers the period, actually 1790 to 1852. It's really more official or semi-official correspondence, but there's everything relating to his military campaigns, but also very important political and social material relating to all the different political offices that he held, but also the fact that he was at one stage the most famous person in England, probably, or the UK. He was contacted by everybody from somebody who could be a tailor in the East End of London to Sir Walter Scott, all sorts of celebrity fans, etc. So he actually collected and corresponded material from all sorts of individuals, covering a whole range of subjects, even subjects you probably haven't thought about, or I haven't thought about.
I mean, I remember going through them during my PhD and some of the stuff, and I was just looking at around the anniversary of Waterloo, and everything from plans for a steam war chariot,
Oh yes,
through to a gift of a turtle,
yes, yes.
which got a thank you, I remember.
It does, yes. I mean, he was sent something that sounded absolutely disgusting. Somebody sent him a boar's head from somewhere over in Prussia. There was huskies that he sent as a gift. He was sent samples of biscuits that were taken on a ship that went to the Arctic. I can't imagine they were more than just full of weevils by that stage. So, people thought they wanted to engage with him. It's a bit like celebrity today. They think they know his name, they think they know him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they want to make that contact with him. I mean, there's the stage at some point that he has to actually tell his staff at Apsley House not to accept parcels, because people are just constantly sending him things. They're constantly sending him books, which they want. They assume that if somebody accepts it over the door at Apsley House, he's somehow saying that he therefore sponsors this book. So, he is really, really, as I say, the most famous person. But it does create this massive, amazingly diverse collection of material.
Absolutely. I mean, you must know this better than almost anyone, which means that you know him in a weird way better than almost anyone.
It's very strange. Yes, you do. I mean, I have to say, I probably recognise his voice, but when people are quoting him, you will know what would the Duke say about this.
Yeah.
So you do actually, at some point in my, somewhere in my brain, I can say that is very much a genuine Wellington phrase. That's a Wellington sentence. And I wouldn't presume to say I absolutely know his mind, but you certainly know the way he's thinking on many things.
I think that makes a deal of sense. Tell me, just to close out, and this is a bit of a cheeky question, I apologize in advance, either something from the conference or something that you've discovered in the archives that surprised you about him.
Oh, that's interesting. I think the fact that he has obviously some of the papers have emphasised over the conference, he does obviously have somewhat conservative opinions. He obviously has somewhat unacceptable, perhaps, views that sort of resonate with sort of, particularly say, racist views of the period. But he's a man of endless curiosity. He can be very generous. He's obviously quite loyal to his fellow officers.
Very much so.
And actually, it's very interesting. I was very fascinated by your paper about theatrical representations, because one of my interests is his representation in broadside ballads.
Yes, of course.
And one of the things you find there with military ones is it's the idea of he doesn't always support his common soldiers. But I think he's just a man of many contradictions, but very human in many ways. So,
hopefully that can be said of all of us. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conference and this interview. We hope to be back at some point for the next one.
We're hoping in about 2028. We're going to hopefully go back to the every 3 years pattern.
That would be spectacular. It would be really good to have that back. It's a wonderful, knowing that it's coming is wonderful to sort of point grad students at it and be like, think about this.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And for the last time, you are joining us here at the Wellington Congress. And I have another familiar face here, the man, sadly so. Well, no, but also the man responsible for getting us the permission to do this.
I mean, you say that. I sent an email. It sounds... Okay, no, I should
You
probably
knew who to
play
send
this.
the email to.
I should probably play this like I'm some kind of hero, shouldn't I?
You should.
Like, it was a bitter struggle. It really wasn't. Like, Karen is lovely,
She
as
is.
you've just seen from that last interview. And she was like, yeah, sure, you could come and box pop people if you like, if that's your thing. And she's been incredibly welcoming, and we're very privileged to be here.
No, we absolutely are, and it is lovely to be here. This has been a spectacular conference.
It's been good, hasn't it?
It has been. A couple of very good papers. You brought out the big guns.
So I sold this as anticipating a riot because I went after Wellington. And I went after Wellington in quite a big way, because we do lots of praising of the guy for his visionary nature, the fact that he's ultra analytical about everything, he's I mean, sure, Wellington's always got an opinion about everything.
He does, which makes him a favorite of historians, because you can pull something.
For sure, but by and large, we always go, actually, yeah, you know what, most of what he says is based on some kind of kernel of truth. The big exception being the scum of the earth comment. You know, that's something that's been debated for a long time.
Yeah, Great Reform Act.
Well, yeah, the Great Reform Act. I've never seen so many bad hats. Yeah, but I mean, you're better placed to comment on hat design than I am.
Well, the thing is, yes, on the sartorial side, he was in fact ahead of his time, right? None of us are wearing breeches anymore. We are all in trousers, and he saw that coming.
And the Wellington boot is a very kind of utilitarian, very pragmatic piece.
Honestly, I think he'd be slightly horrified that it's become this utilitarian rubber thing
being used by farmers. Really?
No, not even gentlemen farmers. No. But you're sort of, you came out swinging with Wellington was a racist.
Yeah, basically.
And it didn't. There was a bit of a it didn't get the riot I expected it to.
No, I mean, I think it sometimes depends on your crowd. That's fair. Right. I think there are certain people who would have stood up and stormed out, but I was also very careful in how I put something. Like, it's one of those papers that can trash a reputation if you don't lay it out carefully. Like, you don't come out just going, "Hi guys, Wellington was a bit of a twat when it came to questions of race. Lots of love, my name's Zack."
Cutting edge analysis of the type you expect from the Napoleonic Wars podcast.
Yeah. So I started it with Scum of the Earth, and then said, okay, so this begs the question: if that's what he thinks about the regular army, what does he say about the sepoys? And then as you start to unpick it, you come out with Wellington, when he's just gone out to India and he's saying things like, these people are the most deceitful race of people, they've got no redeeming qualities, they're cruel, and they're actually, he doesn't use the word barbaric, but he's using a whole load of language where you just go, flipping hell, that is not good.
No, it's not.
And then the end point that I used was I kind of said, well, look, this is the last thing that I found, which is 1835. And he's grilled in front of the parliamentary inquiry for flogging. So that's a big kind of stage. It's a place where people are going to keep coming back to that. Stop giggling about the fact that I've used a flogging reference.
I know, I'm just curious. It was. I will freely credit you on that. It was entirely apt. I'm just curious if you actually needed to read the thing to cite it, or if you could just recite it from memory at this point.
No, I did need to double check.
Okay, fair. Always double check your sources, everybody.
Indeed, there you go. We're even giving history tips at this point.
I
But yeah, so the point is, in that inquiry, he turns around and says, well, basically the Bengal troops are so much more superior than the Madras and Bombay troops. So for folks who aren't familiar, the East India Company army has three kind of separate forces. The Bengal army is the biggest, and you've got the Bombay and the Madras forces. And what he's basically saying is the Bengal troops are the best, the Bombay and Madras troops not so much. Like the guys that we recruit for the Bengal army, they're just kind of physically better, all round just more sort of kind of better soldiers. Superior is the word that he uses. Which sounds great, and you kind of think, well, look, Wellington served out in India, Second Anglo-Maratha War, there's a guy who should know, right? And that's what everybody's thinking in the inquiry. Except there's a small problem. Wellington doesn't serve with the Bengali troops.
Yeah.
Because most of his fighting is done in the south or kind of central regions. The troops, the sepoy troops that are used for those campaigns are taken from the Bombay and Madras troops. So he doesn't see the Bengal troops in substantial numbers to be able to say, oh, well, no, they're definitely better. Which then begs the question, well, why is he saying that? And basically what you then do is dig into what other people are saying at the time and realise that people are basically saying that the guys in the south are inferior because they are fundamentally, one of the things that they're bitching about is darker skin tone. They're also kind of saying these guys are meeker, which is really kind of it's a reflection of the fact that these guys are lower caste, and they're using the army as a means of social mobility, and so they're more willing to listen and do what you want, but instead of obedience, yes, that's a good thing, it's, oh no, these people are far too meek, we can't make good soldiers out of these types.
Even as they storm the walls of Seringapatam.
Precisely. And then the other element of it is basically Aryanism, because there is this theory knocking around amongst the white folks in India during this period that, oh, well, the people in the north of the country, because they have a lighter skin tone, that means that they're descended from the same Aryan race as Europeans, so therefore they're the right people. And as we've discussed on the podcast in the past, that concept, which becomes very prominent. Like Wellington doesn't start with this idea.
He doesn't.
He's just kind of continuing it.
You've all seen the late Victorian like archetypes of people with like the rankings, that are so deeply problematic.
Yeah. And as we've discussed on the last State of the Union, this is a concept that only gets kicked in the dick when that's a technical term, because we end the conference on a high.
We always do.
When you have the India mutiny, and actually they turn around and go, hang on, no, the Bengal troops have. No, but those are the ones we trust. Those are the ones we thought were better.
And then the ones that they think are worse not only stay loyal but defeat the ones that have gone AWOL.
Exactly.
Or not even gone AWOL. They've just gone nuts.
So I mean, you have to lay it out in that very kind of careful, step-by-step process, and then by the end of it, you kind of sit back and go, no, actually, that's not just somebody kind of trying to be edgy and go, oh look, Wellington are racist. Somebody noticed me. Instead, somebody's actually gone into the archives and picked through his words and then gone, okay, so where does this come from?
But do please notice, Zach.
Well, I mean, you're welcome to. If it means that you subscribe to our Patreon and give us money.
Or you have a job for him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't object to one of those. I mean, as you can see, Southampton is quite a nice
It is actually. It's genuinely pleasant today.
And
it's been a good weekend.
Yeah, my time in Portsmouth ends in about 18 months. So,
good.
If anybody in Southampton wants to employ me, I'm listening.
He will move from port to port.
I will. I've jumped from... See, this was always the debate when I started at Portsmouth. Did I join the dark side, or had I previously been at the dark side? Because I've been at Southampton, gone to Portsmouth.
I think the true answer is as long as you don't go to Plymouth.
Don't start giving me ideas, man.
I used to joke that I collected ancient universities. Apparently, Zach collects important British naval towns.
Yeah, I can do that. Maritime, dear boy.
Maritime. I apologize.
Maritime.
I apologize. All right. Well, you will hear more from us very, very soon because you can apparently never avoid us. We even put things out there for people who don't subscribe.
So. Although I am going to actually quiz you. What was your favourite paper or favourite moment?
That's a hard one. That is a very hard one. I mean, Severin is always a joy. Watching that, the letters. I was delighted to not be the only one extolling poetry. That was lovely. Although I always know a paper is successful when I get Jackie to cackle.
Yes.
And I manage that, so I'm very pleased with that. There's been a variety. Beatrice's keynote was spectacular.
Yeah.
And just a true, I knew going in. It's Beatrice. But honestly, it was a damn good conference. I will come back to this next SOTU.
Okay.
Because it's always your brain is swimming and then you're like, okay, what papers stuck with me? This conference has done what conferences are supposed to do for me. I'm walking out of here potentially with articles with both Beatrice and Ed Koss. One extreme and the other, right, in terms of how military history has gone.
Yeah, totally.
But it should be a good time. So I think those are the top hits. We finished with some excellent British satirical dick jokes.
Yes, we did.
So
I mean that was very on brand.
It was.
For us.
It was.
Yeah. Comments about how Queen Victoria liked a German sausage rather than a British one.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that.
That's a literal quote.
It is.
So on that note, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod, live from the Wellington Congress in the University of Southampton.
We're not sure when we'll be back for our next live conference set of Vox Pops, but we will be back with you very soon. Cheers.
What did you think of this episode? If you're listening on Spotify, you can now post your comments and questions, and we'll get back to you. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest news, sign up to our mailing list. The link is in the description. And don't forget that you can enjoy early access, exclusive episodes, online courses, and much, much more on Patreon. The link is in the description. And if you're looking for personalized merch for the Napoleonic nerd in your life, drop us a line on social media and we can design something for you. Shout outs to our patrons who, at the time of recording in late March 2025, were in the mentioned in dispatches tier, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Jim Getz, Jeff Maple,
Robin Brasher, Indiana Fats, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Ian Harding, Anonymous American, James Flewick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, Ted Andrews, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Joe Ayres, Darla Vincent, Peter Findlay, Giovanni, Steve Gillen, Jean-Baptiste Van Merlem, Daniel Friedman, Neil Reed, Jonathan Willits, and Wojciech Stefanovic. The Admirals, John Haynes, Mike Guest, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Priest, David Maxwell, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Beman, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Jason Morn, and Tim Pritchard. The Chiefs of Staff, that's Adam Coslin, the Marshals, Ryan Diamond and JC Kaiser, the Legion de Scholars, Dan Hazelwood and Bob Burnham, and in the Crown Yourself tier, Emperor of the First French Empire Todd Campbell and Duke of Wellington Laird Campbell. We'll be back very soon, but until then, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. On behalf of myself, Liam, Luke, Josh and Zoe, take care of yourselves, folks, stay well, and as always, thank you for listening.